So I want to introduce to you tonight, from Apple, Luke Tristan.
So, here we are. This is the new version of Final Cut Pro 10. This is Final Cut Pro 10.3. Lots and lots of new features to talk about. Before I get into the software and the new features, I want to talk a little bit about the project we're looking at here. If you saw our keynote in October, when we launched the new MacBook Pro, you might have seen a little Final Cut Pro 10 demo on stage in the keynote, which is great for us, very gratifying. And this project was what they used. It looks at a botanical artist in Japan named Azuma Makoto. Before I get started, I'm just going to play back the first part of this project. All of this was shot 4K. It's beautiful footage, and then we'll jump into the demo. So it gives you a sense of the project. As I said, really beautiful footage playing back here, of course, all on the new MacBook Pro with Touch Bar. And speaking of the Touch Bar, one of the things that we did in Final Cut Pro 10.3 is we built pretty deep support in the application for the Touch Bar. So I can start actually right here in full screen mode. You're seeing here what I'm seeing here on the Touch Bar on the system. One of the features we have in the Touch Bar is this timeline view. So when I'm playing back full screen, you can see down here, what I'm actually seeing is a representation of what's actually on the timeline. So I can move my finger backwards and forwards here on the touch bar and actually skim through my project, even in full screen view, and still have that little view here in the touch bar to get a sense of where I am in the project, which is really nice. It does also work if I'm in the UI, not in full screen mode. I can also go into this same timeline view. I can use it to zoom by moving that range backwards and forwards, and then if I move that backwards and forwards with that zoom range selected, then I can use it to navigate up and down the timeline, which is a really nice feature that we've introduced in the touch bar for Final Cut Pro 10. So there'll be a few other things that use the touch bar as I go through this demo, and I'll bring it up when it's appropriate. But I'm going to start by talking about the new UI. So for any of you that are current Final Cut Pro 10 users that downloaded Final Cut Pro 10.3, the first thing you'll notice, of course, is the completely redesigned interface. First thing you see is that we've now adopted this flatter gray color scheme. And the idea behind that is we want to drop the UI and the controls a little bit more into the background so you can focus on what's most important to you, which of course is all your great content. The other thing you'll notice straight away looking at the new UI is we now have colored roles. So for those of you that haven't worked with roles before in Final Cut Pro 10, you can think of a role as a label that describes what a particular clip is. You can see it up here in the browser. So I have some music, I have some sound effects, I have some dialogue. And you'll notice that my music clips are all green, my sound effects are that nice teal color. I have dark blue for my dialogue. I can see that in the browser. I can also see it down here in the timeline. And also over here in the timeline index, you can see the same colors are applied. And obviously one of the great benefits to this is I can now look at the browser or I can look at the timeline, and at a glance I can identify very quickly what's in my project. I know instantly where my music is, my dialogue, my titles, and so forth. So we're going to be talking a lot more about roles as we get later in the demo. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the UI first. So one other thing I should mention, especially for users that have used previous versions of Final Cut Pro 10 or are just upgrading to 10.3, we have moved some of the controls around. rest assured everything is still there. The reason we've done that is we've tried to group like controls together. So I'll start up here in the top left-hand corner. So this should be familiar to current Final Cut Pro 10 users. This is my library view. So here I'm seeing my events and libraries and keywords and so forth. Next to that, though, I now have my content libraries. So these were previously accessed from the bottom right-hand corner of the timeline. The reason we've moved them up here, well, first of all, it keeps all our content together. And also, you can see straight away the benefit of having this nice big browser space to view our content libraries. So in this case, I can look at my photos. I have a nice big space in the UI to look at my content and see what I have, which is very useful. I also have my sound libraries here, including my sound effects. You'll notice that we know this is a sound effect, so we've automatically applied the sound effect role. That's why it's that teal color. I also get a nice high-resolution waveform preview. I'm going to go ahead and search for a sound effect in this library. I know that later on I'm going to need to use some wind sound effects, so I can select them here. I can preview it. I think that's adequately spooky. So I'm going to go ahead. I can go ahead and select a range of this sound effect I'm going to use. And again, because this sits now right next to my libraries, it's really easy just to drag it across, drop it into my selects event, and it's ready to go when it comes time to edit, which is very helpful. So next to my content libraries, I also now find my installed titles and generators. So again, this has moved up from where they used to sit down on the right-hand side in the timeline. So here I have all my installed titles. I can also access my generators. Again, I get a nice big window to be able to see what I'm working with. What's also interesting is I can access any custom titles from this location as well. So in this case, we have a custom title that we've built for this project. So Zuma Makoto, our botanical artist. And just like before, I can edit directly from here into the timeline. So I'm going to grab this title. Let's move down here into the timeline. I'm going to drop this down into the timeline where I want it to be positioned. Now, a couple of really cool things I can do here using the touch bar. If I want to just trim this to the playhead, so I want to trim my title just to the end of this scene of Tokyo, I can just place my playhead where I want it to end. And right here on the touch bar, I have a trim to playhead button. And when I press that, it just trims it back to the end of that clip. What's also very useful is if I'm working in titles, if I select my text here, I get some additional text controls on the touch bar. So I could, for example, if I have the text selected, change the color. So in this case, maybe I want to make it a nice orange color to reflect the sunset here in the scene, which I can do there using my color picker. I can even do some pretty sophisticated things like turn this entire title into a 3D title. I have a 3D button right here, press 3D, just like that. I now have a fully interactive 3D title that I can manipulate right here in the viewer. So again, some really nice controls that you can access directly in the touch bar. The other thing I should mention about custom motion templates, now you have the option when you use them in a project to bundle them into the library that you're working with. So when you move that library from machine to machine, all of your custom templates will move with it, which means you don't have to separately copy those templates into the motion templates directory, which you had to do in previous versions. So that's a nice improvement. So that looks good. Let's just have a look at my title, make sure it's going to work. So you can see just with a few taps there on the touch bar, I've very quickly added my title, trimmed it, and customized it, which is really, really nice. A few other quick comments about where things are in the UI for those that are curious. Up here I have my import window, I have my keyword editor. This is where the background tasks are if you're looking for them. So we've moved them up in the top left-hand corner so they're available. I can open the background tasks window by clicking on the button here. We just felt that it was nice to have it there rather than always in the middle of the UI where you're perhaps looking at time code, concentrating on the timeline. You do get a subtle progress wheel as well if the background tasks are running, so you can see where things are at like you could before as well. Over here I can turn off various parts of the UI like my browser and the inspector. I have my export options here. And I can still access the transitions and the filters down here on the right-hand side in the timeline. And again, the reason they've stayed where they were before is because they're things that you're typically doing in the timeline. So they're staying in context down there in the timeline. Another new feature we've added in terms of the interface is a concept we call workspaces. So what a workspace is basically a pre-configured setup with the windows that you want open and the sizing of those windows. We have a number of built-in workspaces to get you started. So I'm in a default view at the moment, but I'm going to go down and I'm going to choose the second default, which we call Organize. And this is interesting. You might notice a couple of things straight away about this workspace. First of all, we now have the ability in Final Cut Pro 10.3 to completely hide the timeline. So if you're doing logging work, or if you're ingesting footage, if you're reviewing stuff, and you want to take full advantage of all of your screen, you don't need to start editing at that point. You can hide the timeline, and then you obviously have more screen available for everything you need. The other thing you'll notice while I'm in this view is we also now have the ability to show you a full height inspector. The other thing I'll point out while I'm up here, we talked a little bit about the touch bar. We've added some touch bar controls you can access when you're in the browser. You can see here that if I want to jump from the start to the end of a clip, I've got a start and an end button here that I can use to do that in the touch bar. If I've already selected a range, and perhaps I want to clear that selection, I want to select the whole clip or change my selection, there's a clear selection button. So with a single tap here, clear selection, that selection is removed. And if I want to toggle between film strip view and list view, I have a button in the touch bar for doing that as well. And you can see next to my clear selection button, now I'm in list view, I can toggle back to film strip view. And again, it's just a nice use of the touch bar in Final Cut Pro 10. The other thing I should mention with regard to workspaces, you can see that there's also this option to save your own workspaces. So you can configure the screens however you want. It includes the ability to support dual display layouts as well. You save this into a little workspace file, and you can take that workspace file and copy it onto any of your other systems and instantly have the UI set up exactly the way you want. So that's very handy. I'm going to move along and bring up the third built-in workspace that we have, which we call Color and Effects. And as the name suggests, it's a great workspace for doing color correction and visual effects. It opens up our beautiful high-resolution, highly responsive video scopes. I have my effects open down here as well. This is actually a very good opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the new color functionality that we've introduced in this release. So I'm going to come back here in the timeline and position it on this nice red flower we had in our opening sequence. At the moment, this timeline that we're looking at is in the standard HD Rec 709 color space. And I know that because up here in the scopes, it's telling me it's in Rec 709, which also means all of my scopes are calibrated to Rec 709. But we now also support a wide color gamut Rec 2020 color space in Final Cut Pro 10. Now, in order to work in Rec 2020, I have to change my project properties and tell it that I want to work in the Rec 2020 color space. So to do that, I open up the project properties. And again, for those of you that have worked already in other versions of Final Cut Pro 10, this will look somewhat familiar. The thing that's been added, of course, is I now have the option to change the color space. So I'm going to change it from Rec 709 to wide gamut Rec 2020. And when I do that, watch what happens to the scopes. So I'm now going to work in Rec 2020. The scopes are updated, so these are now showing me the ranges that calibrate to Rec 2020. And of course, in my RGB parade, I have additional headroom, additional colors that I can represent. You'll see also, just for reference up here, it's going to tell me that I'm now working in Rec 2020. And just to give you a sense of what difference this can make, obviously we're not in a projector here that's showing you Rec 2020, but what we did do is we applied a filter to this clip to bring it into a broadcast safe space in Rec 709. The underlying clip's actually Rec 2020. So just to give you an idea of the delta, I'm going to take that color correction off and you'll get a sense of the difference. Now, I'm actually looking at this on the screen here on my MacBook Pro, which is a P3 display. Not the same as Rec 2020, but can cover additional colors beyond what you can see in Rec 709. And it's incredibly vivid here on the screen. I'm seeing, particularly in the red and the greens, a lot more colors that we haven't previously been able to represent in standard HD color space. So again, something to look at, new color functionality in Final Cut Pro 10.3. I'm going to move along and I'm going to talk about some of the new editing functionality in this new version of Final Cut Pro 10. So this is an example a little bit further along in my project of a very common problem. Any of you guys that do interview work will see this all the time. We have an interview here with the Zoom and Makoto. We've taken 2 sound bites. Unfortunately, we've taken them from different parts of the take, and there's a nasty jump cut in the middle. So let's have a look.
まず水切りというのはお花に注ぎ込む作業ですね。
So you can see how the jump between the 2 sound bites, there's that big movement in his head. It looks a little off. Well, we now have a new built-in transition in Final Cut Pro 10.3 designed to fix that problem, and it's called the flow transition. So you'll find it in the transition menu under dissolves. You'll see it's down there. It's called the flow transition. The reason it's called the flow transition is it leverages the optical flow engine that I'm sure a lot of you know about, which is the engine we've had for some time. We use it for high quality retiming, for deinterlacing. And what it does is it analyzes the out point and the in point of the 2 clips and works out what's happening between the 2 in terms of the motion of the objects. And if necessary, will actually create new frames as part of the transition to smooth out the motion between the out point and the in point. So it's really hard to use. I'll show you how you do it. You just take it and you drop it down. So it actually does the analysis. It works out if it needs to add extra frames. And if I play this back, you'll see what a difference it makes.
まず水切りというのはお花に注ぎ込む作業ですね。
Pretty cool. Just a little side, again on the touch bar, just to give you a sense of what's going on here. By the way, you'll notice as I'm going through this demo, the touch bar is contextual. So the tools that are available to me will change depending on what's selected or where I am in the UI. Because at the moment I have a transition selected, if I want to, I have this little time button here, you'll see on the left-hand side. If I want to adjust the length of my transition, I just press that key. Let's say I want it to be 6 frames, press return. Again, it's just a nice little shortcut for adjusting my transition right there in the touch bar. All right, so I fixed my jump cut. Next thing I want to look at are these 4 clips that I've got after my interview sound bites. So these 4 clips actually constitute a bit of a flashback in the project, and I've felt that I've got a surge of creativity, and I've decided to add this dream effect to these clips to make it look like a flashback. So we can have a look at that. So I think that looks pretty great. Although you can imagine I take this to the producer, she looks at it and says it looks really terrible, and she wants me to remove all of those effects. Well, we now have the ability to do that all in one go. Again, a feature that a lot of people have asked us for. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of those clips that had the dream effect applied. And now, up here in the edit menu, as well as being able to paste effects and attributes, I can also remove attributes. So I'm going to go into remove attributes. You can see up here I get a window that looks like this. One thing to think about when you look at this window is you're selecting what you want to remove. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect the retiming because I don't want to touch that. I just want to remove the dream effect from those clips. So that's selected. Come in here, press remove, and my producer is happy. Done. Remove attributes. So that's a little bit in terms of some of the little editing features we've added. I now want to spend a bit more time talking about roles and how you can use the new roles functionality in the timeline when you're editing. So I'm going to start by looking at the subtitles here. So this project is in Japanese. So we have a set of English subtitles you can see up here underneath. Now at the moment I just have a single role for all my titles. So my subtitles are grouped together in a role with my opening title, in fact the opening title that we just created. And what I really want to do is I want to create a separate role just for my subtitles so that I could perhaps turn them on and off separately, for example, when I'm exporting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over into the timeline index, and over here in the roles view I have a little button down the bottom that says edit roles, and this is going to take me into the new roles editor. So again, for those of you that have used previous versions of Final Cut Pro 10, this is what the new roles editor looks like. The first thing you notice, of course, is this includes the colors for the roles that we're creating. So let's go ahead and create a new role. I'm going to call this subtitles, so we know what they are. You'll notice how it automatically gets a color. Now if I would like to, I can change the color. So I can choose from a series of pre-selected Apple Design approved colors. But I like the brown. I like the brown. I'm going to stay with that. I think that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and apply that. So now I have a new role that's been created. So what I want to do is I want to take that new subtitle role and I want to apply it just to the subtitles in my project. And I know in the earlier segment we talked a bit about the timeline index. It's a really powerful and sometimes overlooked feature in Final Cut Pro 10. I'm going to use it here to just go through the timeline and select just my subtitles. And again, this is not new functionality with 10.3. It's just a really nice thing to show. So I'm going into my clips view. I'm going to select titles. And I'm just going to go down in the timeline index and just select all of my subtitles. So I don't have to go through in the timeline and select them individually. You can see they're now selected in the timeline. What is new in 10.3 is I can now assign roles directly in the timeline. So I don't have to do this just in the inspector or in the browser. In the context menu you can see I have the ability to assign roles. So I'm going to assign a new video role to my subtitles, which is the one we just created. I'm going to go ahead and assign it, and you'll notice just like that, automatically updates, and of course I get the visual reference because the color changes. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move down to the end of this project, and there's some additional things that I want to edit. So one thing you'll notice straight away is just glancing at the timeline, it's pretty easy for me to work out that maybe something's missing, because if you look at these clips, I have a subtitle, but all I can see is a green music clip and a teal sound effect. There doesn't seem to be any dialogue. In fact, I can play this back. So there's my subtitle, no dialogue. Well, I've got the dialogue clips up here in the browser that I want to add. So you can see them here. Now they've already got the dialogue role. I can preview it up here.
こっちはアートですよね。音の真髄に近づけてくれると思っている。
Now I don't speak Japanese. I'm assured he's actually saying what's in the subtitles. I hope that's the case. Just to give you an idea of how easy this is, though, and this is where it starts to get really powerful. We know these are dialogue clips. We've tagged it with the dialogue role. So when I add these to my timeline, we know where to put them. I don't have to worry about creating tracks. I don't have to worry about what track they go on. I don't have to worry about clip collisions. To add the sound bites, all I have to do is select a byte and place it, and we know where to put it in the timeline. So let's do the first one. I'm just going to place it next to that subtitle. That's the second one. Let's place it next to that subtitle, and there's the third one. I'm done. And you can see, because we know it's dialogue, it's got the right color, and it's also been placed right up there next to the video. We can play this back, make sure they're in the right place.
命はアートですよね。
See how easy that is to do. And again, a lot of this is about very quick editing, very quick organization, so I'm spending less time clicking around managing the timeline and more time thinking about the creative decisions, how I want this to look, how I want it to sound, which is really what editing is all about. So that's good. I've added my sound bites. I'm making some progress. The next thing I want to look at is the end of this project. I have this transition into this kind of fade out into white. It's a bit of a boring ending. So what I have up here is I have this great hero clip. This is actually the installation that that Azuma Makoto made as part of this project, and I'd like to make this the big final shot in my project. So I'm going to grab that, and I'm just going to add this shot to the project. So that's looking great, but of course there's something missing. If I play this back, shot looks great, I don't have any sound design. So what I want to do now is I want to work on my sound effects and build up a nice sound bed with some music to make this a great final shot. Now things get really interesting, because what I really want to do is I want to start by working on my sound effects. At the moment I have my dialogue and my music in that order, and I'd like to move all of my sound effects to the top so I can just focus down on what I'm working on. So I've zoomed out so we can see the whole timeline. I'm going to come back here into the timeline index. And now what I can do is, straight from the timeline index, I can grab any of my roles and automatically reorganize my timeline. So watch what happens. I'm going to grab my sound effects and I'm going to move them up into the top. And just like that, all of my timeline is reorganized. And you can see now over here, down here on the section that we were working on, all of my sound effects are now at the top of the timeline underneath my video. Well, that's great, but I really don't want to be distracted by my other audio while I'm working on my sound effects. So what I can also do is over here I have a little control, a little circle. And if I click on that, what it does is it focuses the timeline just down onto my sound effects. And you can see when I do that, my other roles are minimized. So you can see down here I have these green and these blue bars representing the dialogue and music clips that I'm working with. Now what's really cool about this is, even though these are minimized, this is just a view of the timeline, I can actually grab this music, for example, extend it all the way out to the end, so all of these clips are still editable. I'm just collapsing the way they look in the timeline to make it easier to work. So now I can go ahead and start working here on my sound effects. And it's really important to note that we haven't lost any of the great power of the magnetic timeline. So we've reorganized things, but you'll notice as I start dragging out my sound effects here, other sound effects just move out of the way, so I don't have to worry about clip collisions, just like everyone's used to. So I have all of the great power of working with the magnetic timeline, but I can use roles to organize the timeline exactly the way I want. Let's say I want to go ahead and add a new sound effect. So here's that wind sound effect that we captured earlier on. I'm going to go ahead and drop that down here into this ending sequence. And again, because we know it's a sound effect and we've ordered our timeline with sound effects at the top, when I drop this in, it just drops in underneath the other sound effects at the top of my timeline. I don't have to worry about where it's going to end up. Now I need to make some adjustments to this clip. This is another great example of some of the very powerful controls that we've built into the touch bar. So I'm going to go ahead and select it, and I'll bring up the touch bar so you can see what I'm doing. The first thing I'm going to do, which we saw earlier, is I'm just going to press the trim to playhead to trim that clip back to the end of my timeline. But I also have some great audio controls. You'll see if I press on the audio button here, right here on the touch bar, I can adjust my levels. So I know this wind is a little loud, so I can pull down the levels so that it's not so dominant. And the other thing that's really cool is with a single press here on the touch bar, I can add an audio fade in and an audio fade out. Again, some really nice things you can do directly on the touch bar. So that's looking pretty good. I'm making some progress here. I'm just going to go ahead and take my focus off for a moment. I have one more sound effect I want to drop in, which is this drone sound effect. And I'm going to drop it in just after my 3 dialogue clips that we added earlier on. Now, you'll notice something interesting here. So in this mode, we still want to use the available screen real estate as best we can to show you as much of our project as possible. So in this situation, where I have some dialogue clips, because there's no additional sound effects above them, they just move up here to fill that gap so I don't have unnecessary blank space. You'll notice if I adjust the location of this drone sound effect, we still know the order, so the dialogue clips will drop out of the way. But in this mode, I'm filling up all of the available space. Now it might be we're getting towards the end of the edit perhaps, we've got a very complex sound design. I might actually want my roles not to behave that way, to live in their own separate areas in the timeline, so I can just concentrate on each of my roles without having stuff move up and down the way that I just showed you. So we have another great feature in Final Cut Pro 10.3 we call audio lanes. And again, here I've zoomed out so we can see the whole timeline. And over here in the timeline index, I'm going to choose down here, I have a control that says show audio lanes. So I'm going to go ahead and press show audio lanes and watch what happens in the timeline. So now I get these areas that we call lanes that contain all of the clips for that particular role. So here are all of my sound effects, here's all of my dialogue, and underneath you can see all of my music. Now the difference is the roles stay in the lanes that they're assigned to. So as before, if I was, for example, to move my drone sound effect backwards and forwards, you'll notice how now those 3 dialogue clips don't move up to fill the available space. The other thing you'll notice is that the lanes are variable height, so we only make the lanes wide enough to contain all of the clips in that lane, so we're not creating unnecessary blank space. And again, this is a really great way of organizing your timeline if you want to be able to see each of your individual audio roles in a separate part of the timeline. So we've made great progress, we've added our sound effects, we extended our music, we added our dialogue. Now I want to make a few final global adjustments, but I want to be able to do that to a complete role component or a complete group, role group all at once. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select all my clips, and I'm going to create a compound clip. So for those of you that have used Final Cut Pro 10 before, very familiar with compound clips. I'm going to go and call this final, because this is going to be our final mix. And this is what it looks like as a compound clip when I show audio lanes. So now what I have is I have a container, if you like, in my compound clip for all my video. I have a separate container for all of my sound effects. I have another container for all my dialogue, and down here I have a container for all my music. Now I can still change the view, so I can say, I'd like to have my dialogue at the top. I can rearrange it right here in the compound clip. But now, of course, as you've probably guessed, I can make global adjustments to an entire role all at once. So for example, if I wanted to adjust my dialogue levels, I can adjust them here directly in my compound clip, and I'm adjusting the levels at all of my dialogue clips all at once. I can also add effects. So a very common example, and something I'd probably do in this project, is add a vocal compressor to my dialogue. So over here, I can jump into my effects. I'm going to do a search for my compressor. There it is. It's my Logic plugin. I'm going to drop it down, and I'm done. So that's applied that to all of my dialogue clips all in one go. So it's a really great way of making those global adjustments. All right, so in that little 4 or 5 minutes at the end, I've added my sound effects, I've extended the music, I've put my dialogue clips in, I've done some global adjustments. Let's play that all back and see what sort of job I've done.
命はアートですよね。物事の真髄に近づけてくれると思っています。これが私に創作意欲を引き出してくれるのです。
That is a look at some of the new features in Final Cut Pro 10.3. Thank you.